was like, oh my God, that's it. I mean, this is kind of a rogue example. Talking so much shit. If I don't care about a story, no one else is going to. Not only like a way out of where I was, but as a way in. Feeling so emboldened and brazen because like by our being together in the water, it's not like you can look at a body under a microscope and think, this one's queer.
Hello and welcome to Hot Nerds. My guest today is Dylin Hardcastle, an award-winning author, artist, screenwriter and scholar based on Gadigal Land. We are in fact recording this here on stolen Gadigal Land of the Eora Nation, which we have the fortune to live, work and create on. We acknowledge the traditional owners of country and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay respect to their elders past, present and emerging, and hope to share connection to land, waters and culture for a meaningful and sustainable future. We acknowledge the split in our identity and wish to heal it. Dylin has had their own struggles with identity, mental health and gender dysphoria. This is no secret. They have written 4 critically acclaimed books, one of which being a memoir about a lot of that. But the most recent is Language of Limbs, exploring queer joy amongst a violent and oppressive local history. They've got heaps of awards and accolades, so many that I can't list here, and likely more to come, with a new book in the works and a screen adaptation of Language of Limbs. And they've started a zine, Fruits, with Peo Michie. Is it Michie?
Yeah, Peo Michie.
Thank you very much, Peo Michie. Not to mention being a visual artist, having undertaken artist residencies all around the world. And they're almost finished their PhD.
So close.
And they've just broken their ankle. So amongst all of this, how are you today?
I'm actually really happy to be here. I'm so close. As I was saying to you before, the goalposts of this PhD just keep shifting a little bit further and further away, and I very much feel like I'm almost there every day. But at some point in the next week or so, I actually will get there and kick the goal.
Fantastic.
Not with this broken ankle.
I know. We'll keep cheering for you.
Thank you.
Is this your first PhD?
It is, yes.
How did you write Language of Limbs? That was when you were at Oxford but that wasn't as part of a PhD?
No. So I wrote Below Deck as my research project when I was studying at Oxford in the UK. Mm-hmm. And then A Language of Limbs was actually the creative component of this PhD.
Oh, okay. So how long has the PhD been?
4 years.
Wow.
Yeah,
wow.
just clicked over the 4 years. Was about 3 days out from submission when I broke my ankle. So here we are.
That's it. Yeah. Well, congratulations on the book itself. Thank you. Almost getting to the end of the PhD overall. Yeah. How does it feel having something so tangible and now so externally successful out of the PhD that is still kind of happening?
Yeah, it's been amazing. I guess it was really exciting to have the book come out sort of before I've actually finished the PhD, and to sort of have the book now in conversation with an audience has also, like, I guess, filtered back into the way that I'm thinking about the dissertation, which is a critical component of the PhD. It's
like a reflective piece of it, or? It's
actually not. So the dissertation is its own like contribution to, I guess, like an academic field of theory, so it's like what I'm doing in the dissertation is, I guess, informed by the novel, and the novel is informed by the theoretical work, but they're sort of like in conversation with each other, as opposed to one being why I wrote the novel in the way that I did. The dissertations, I'm doing a deep dive on 3 contemporary texts or contemporary books, and looking at how these authors have used the uncanny as a way to sort of problematize and challenge our prevailing assumptions about queer bodies and queer identity.
And the uncanny is something that you do enjoy exploring.
I do. My background's actually, as you said, in visual arts. I went to art school for my undergrad and came across the uncanny when I was studying surrealism, and it's sort of that eerie anxiety that arises when we experience something unfamiliar in a familiar setting, or vice versa. So like, seeing a stranger on the street is not particularly unnerving, but if a stranger walked into your bedroom, a familiar domain with an unfamiliar sort of foreign entity entering it, that's kind of like arouse and incite the uncanny. And so kind of over the last 100 years, a whole heap of different theorists and philosophers and a whole heap of different people have like tried to map why we experience the uncanny, because even though it is a subjective experience, there are like particular locations or motifs that are particularly ripe with potential to produce the uncanny. And so I'm looking at how these 3 authors of the text that I've chosen have like specifically, I guess, deployed those motifs as a way to like, sort of make queerness uncomfortable in a way that like hopefully delivers us somewhere, so that we can talk meaningfully about queer and trans bodies.
And when so that the uncanny isn't just a general descriptive term, it's actually the definition of a specific thing in that body of theory, or it's more than just, oh, that's uncanny lol. Like there's actually a lot of research underneath what that's all about.
Absolutely, because I guess over the last sort of 100 or 150 years, different people have tried to say, why do we experience the uncanny, and they've tried to sort of come up with different theories and I guess sort of map or chart the instances in which the uncanny is like most likely to arise. And then I guess a lot of visual artists have since then purposely like taken those theories and been like, okay, well, sleepwalking is like particularly uncanny. And so then you have like Tony Matelli doing the sleepwalking sculptures. Pretty sure I said his name right, but the sleepwalking sculptures, and he like put them in college campuses where it was snowing, and there's this like hyper realist sculpture of a man like sleepwalking in his underwear through the campus, and it's like, extremely disturbing, not only because like sleepwalking sort of makes you think, well, okay, if it's not this person that I know controlling themselves, like what foreign entity is within this person that's like guiding this motion.
Plus they're in their undies in the snow.
Exactly. And that also the double take, like there's a Japanese roboticist who basically theorized why something that is almost real but not quite real or realistic is particularly uncanny. And so it's like the moment at which a robot is like so realistic that you double take, but then you realize that it's not, that's the most sort of uncanny moment, where something is like so lifelike and so human-like that you do a double take, but then in the realizing that it's not actually a human, that's the spooky part.
Well, that is, I think they specifically call that the uncanny valley, isn't it? Where the robot becomes, it's beyond that point of being obviously a robot. Yeah. But is it just shy of being completely realistic?
Exactly, because you don't want to fully believe it, because then it's not uncanny. You're just seeing it as another person.
It's like seeing AI with just that something wrong, and you're just not, is this AI or not?
Exactly.
And, it is. And I don't know exactly why. Maybe it's just that little bit there, but it's...
totally. That's exactly it.
So when it comes to actually employing this, as you said, for, in slightly, maybe not confrontationally, but like using the uncanny to, I guess, tell stories around queerness, is that interplay because we're dealing with things that are quote unquote normalized, or from particular, that broader perspective of kind of, the colonial straight perspective, so that the uncanny is kind of like a little bit of a helpful mallet in that shop front window?
It is. And, in sort of the last 20 years, a couple of queer theorists have looked at this connection between queerness and the uncanny, in that, for instance, to see two people of the same gender kissing, there's something in, familiar in the kiss and in the intimacy that we recognize because we've seen it in all sorts of media. And then perhaps if that's the first time you've seen two people of the same gender kissing, that's the like unfamiliar thing that enters. And so, that's just like one instance, but they've mapped all the sort of, there's one theorist, Olu Jensen, who I'm particularly obsessed with, who's mapped all sorts of ways in which like queerness haunts heterosexuality and is this kind of like ghost almost that's like, forever at the periphery of, what we say, quote unquote, big quote marks here of like normative ways of being.
I like that. You said that, was it the queerness is always haunting heterosexuality, or the ghost of... Is that also because no one's completely straight?
Yeah, who knows?
It's haunting because it's like we may not. I mean, that was me growing up, calling myself mostly straight and never actually acknowledging that the ghost.
Totally.
I guess, yeah.
Totally.
So I definitely feel you on that.
Yeah.
Now, you did say that this is a welcome break in your, PhD period.
Yeah.
So instead of, we don't have to go fully into the, you're hitting me with all that. I can tell what's on your mind. You've got it all.
I know, I'm sorry. I'm so
it's
deep in
good.
it at the moment.
That's literally what we're here for. It's the hot nerds. But in case, you're looking for a more welcome respite, how's the surfing going? Just to kick us off in that direction. Are you obviously not surfing right now if you're in a moon boot?
Yes, not right now, but I did have, a really incredible summer surfing very frequently. I had I had top surgery last year, and I had my first surf post top surgery, actually up at Broken Head on Budgeland Country, and it was like so profound. I paddled out like just in board shorts, and it was the middle of winter, but I was like, what the hell? This is my moment.
Yeah.
And I like caught my first wave, and I honestly just felt so childlike. Like I hadn't felt that comfortable in the water since I was like 9 years old. Wow. And, because I started surfing when I was 7 or 8, and I then just kind of burst into tears in the most I was so moved by it, and then looked up and this ginormous dolphin just jumped out of the next set that was coming through, and I was like, oh, of course, this is amazing.
Is this God?
Yeah, literally, honestly, and surfing in the last since then. So that was sort of in July, I think, when I had that first surf in board shorts, and I think one thing that was really interesting that took a minute to get used to was just being stared at so much in the lineup, and it is such a hyper masculine, very cishet space for the most part.
And is that because scars are visible?
Yeah. It's definitely being in board shorts with visible scars, and I just had this moment. I remember quite early on where I was because when I was growing up, surfing, there was only ever men and boys in the water, and when I was at Board Riders when I was a teenager, I was surfing in the boys division.
Oh, really?
And, because there wasn't enough, and there wasn't any other girls at the beach that I was surfing at, and so I kind of grew up with being stared at and very much an only person, the only one in the lineup anyway. And I just had this beautiful thought quite early on, surfing in board shorts with no shirt on, where I was oh, this feels new, and probably a lot of people in the surf haven't seen a transmasculine surfer paddling out with scars on their chest. But I just had this moment of being oh, I did this. I did this for years, where I was so often the only person presenting in the way that I was as a child and a teenager in the water. And I was kind of settled into that, just being oh, it's okay, I've done this before, and maybe in another 20 years there'll be heaps of trans people in this water, and we can hope for that.
Well, please, let's get more people in that, because I grew up in Diamond Beach, up on Warramai Land, Foster Taree area. Thankfully we had there was definitely enough girls to be surfing, definitely no one trans, at least at the time, or that was visible, but there definitely were. And I think that's that those conversations are definitely happening in at least WSL and
totally
all that. But it's what you just described. It's a wild full circle moment.
Yeah.
That you would and I guess this is all happening. You've had such a massive year last year with the book release, still working through the PhD, the book getting screenplay, tick of approval, and then obviously the key moment of your transitions happening, the key moments of your transition happening. So when you're going surfing during summer, just past, was it kind of oh my God, all of this stuff that I've been working hard on is kind of getting to that point? Is there that feeling, or is it just on to the next thing I got to do?
No, it's definitely what you said. And it was really beautiful, I think, as well, just kind of, I think it's it's so funny because the water is the one place, and like being in the ocean, I feel so comfortable and so at home. And yeah, so like seen, like feel and see myself like repeated in that space, and that space like in me. And so it was like funny to feel like one of the places that I felt most, I guess, like quote unquote alien, was also the place that I felt most at home, you know, and not because there was anything innately wrong with like being in the water. It was because of the way that other people were like looking, or, you know, maybe confronted, or feeling confronted by my being there. And yet there was like a few times early on in summer where I was with two other friends that are trans in the water, who are, two of my closest friends. And we were just like talking so much shit. Like we're just sitting in the lineup, you know, talking about like really explicitly sexual stuff, like where I honestly just felt like we had this bubble or sort of like force field around us, you know, and I was like talking about this like new strap on, and then like just suddenly clocking that there's like all these men sitting like less than a meter away from us, and kind of just like feeling so emboldened and brazen because like by our being together in the water, and just just feeling so strong in our like being there together. And kind of like that force field very much just felt like impenetrable, like where I was like, oh, we can just, you know, we're just being outrageous and fully ourselves in the water, and
which is a taboo, which has been a taboo for you.
Totally.
And you know, even whether it's that and worrying or not worrying about what people around you are hearing, or telling me about, you know, the new version, the new edition of the Zine, and someone walking in on you and you're like, oh shit, this is the sex scene, I gotta close it. Like that impulse to like almost self-censor in public, and being overly self-conscious because of the way other people direct attention to you. Whether it's surfing out in the lineup or walking down the street or writing your words, please, you know, are you feeling more emboldened as every day goes on? Is that a constant learning thing? Is it or is it these moments that you clock and it's like, oh, that was a great, amazing time out in the water with my friends, and that carries you further on the journey?
I think it's that, you know, you have these moments, and they I remember I used to visualize, I mean, this is kind of a rogue example, but like I remember when
rogue examples.
Well, I remember when I you know, was much younger and had sort of the early stages of, the early episodes of bipolar that I experienced, of like mania and depression, where, you know, I had a lot of like intense depressive episodes, like ideation, or suicide ideation. And then in the wake of that, I remember whenever I was like lucid and sort of back on my feet, whenever I had like a moment of like really intense joy, or just kind of a, oh, this is why I'm still here moment, I would like visualize sort of opening a like treasure chest in the like middle of my chest, where I was like would put in those memories and like store them and lock them in, and just be like, oh, okay, for the next time that I'm like confronted by this really intense depression, I'll like have this chest of images and moments like locked away to then like open up and be like, oh, okay, that's worth staying for, or that's worth persevering through this episode. And like I think similarly, you know, in a different way, but also in some ways similar, those moments, as you were saying, like do make you feel emboldened, and sort of like collecting them and then being like, oh, these are for the rainy days, or, you know, these are for the times when the world might make me feel like a freak, and not in a hot way. Like, you know, where it's like there's heaps of awful stuff getting said in the media, or, you know, whatever it is, or whatever the headlines are saying, then it's like you have this little chest of those moments where I'm like, oh no, like
that makes it worth it.
Yeah, totally.
Is writing a bit like the treasure chest as well?
Yeah, definitely.
Are you trying to capture those you know, and again, so much, you know, sad and horrific stuff happens in the book, but a lot of it is about joy and queer joy, and a lot of the discussion around it is saying how uplifting those elements are. Yeah. And that's, you know, when you're talking about the treasure chest, I'm like, oh, and whether you're journaling for yourself, which many people do for their mental health, and keeping written reminders of why they should be alive. That obviously that'll naturally come through your writing. Is that something that you do it intentionally with journaling, or is it something that just seeps through with the writing?
I think
you also came to writing later as well. So I'm also cognizant that your relationship with writing has changed over time as well. You may not have had that chest earlier on.
Yeah, it's funny. I was like, I journaled and wrote stories a lot as a kid, and as a young person, and then sort of forgot that practice for a while because I was hell-bent on being a processor. And then when I first sort of ended up in a psych ward when I was 17, that I found writing again as not only like a way out of where I was, but as a way in. And I feel like that's really what writing has continued to be for me, is this way in where I like make sense of myself on the page. And I very much feel like like when I finish a book or finish a project, it's sort of like that's everything I know about the world up until that moment, and now I can look back on like my early works and be like, oh my God, I'm mortified, and yet, for various ways in which they're problematic and terrible, but also I guess like byproduct of them being out in the world, I was like able to have conversations and learn and have the work in dialogue with an audience like allowed me to like grow and see the world from new perspectives and new angles, and then get better not only in my craft but in my like learning and being in the world. But the point I was making was, I don't know.
There were some great points in there. And you're talking about the craft, which we're going to get into some good craft as a fellow writer, loving some of the things you've done there. But also, and now I've just forgotten because you mentioned something that I was going to grab onto. Oh, yeah, we were talking earlier about this being, your first novel under Dylin Hardcastle is the name, and you're kind of laughing about like, was the editor aware of like the effect that was going to have on like the perception of it? Is it a debut or is it not? So you're talking about how you feel about those old works being still valuable, but you have mixed feelings about their quality or whatever. So how has that process been? I mean, you can talk about whether it's administratively or strategy-wise in the writing space. I know you've spoken about it and even written. I'm sure you. The book's not about trans people, but it's about the body being, metaphorically and sometimes literally being dismembered. So now, with you now, how are you feeling about the transition in many different parts of your life and in the literary sense as well? Have there been some surprises on, for example, having a new name and people not realizing that you're an established author? Is there anything on the more like personal side that has been, you've obviously had a history where you've come to, you've gone to some darker points with you and your family, and you've come out of all that, but this is a whole new other thing that's happened to you, mentally and physically to come through. So I feel like there's a lot, you've had a big few years in a few different parts of your life, and they all kind of come together with Dylin Hardcastle, the new name, as an author. Totally. So how does, is there anything that's been particularly impactful or surprising or fun or heartbreaking along that journey, especially in the last few years? Yeah.
I think, in the same way that I was talking about writing being the way in, like language very much has been in the way in. And I was actually talking about this with someone yesterday that like, the sort of, I guess the process of naming myself, like Dylin means born of the sea or Welsh. Toward the tide in Welsh, which is where my family's Welsh. And yes, there's like something about making yourself through words and through language that I guess, I was kind of putting into words yesterday what so much of this journey has been, and it's been like an act of doing something, and then, I don't think I necessarily identified as trans first. It was like I started, like I shaved my head, and then I was like, oh, suddenly my like neck up looks like myself in a way that I've never seen that before. And then, like sort of started presenting and wearing more masks, like quote unquote masculine clothes, or moving through the world in this way that was like gender variant to what I had been previously. And there was something about the doing that like came before the words that I had, like, before I had language for it. And I think, that's been an interesting thing, I think, to think about, and probably the role that so much of my writing plays in that has been like finding words and sort of excavating those experiences to be able to then put it into words. I think, as you said, A Language of Limbs is not a story about trans bodies, but it's definitely a story about like queer embodiment and what it means to like participate in queerness, and that the body is like constituted not only like, it's not like you can look at a body under a microscope and be like, this one's queer, but it's like the ways that we like perform or enact queerness, I think, is what constitutes the body, where it's like we're not only that, the ways that we carve out non-normative timelines and life schedules and sort of are imaginative, the ways that we like have non-nuclear kinship and family structures that are imaginative and sort of spreading it laterally in all different directions, and sort of like carving out community, and community very much being a verb and something that you do and participate in, as opposed to like a thing that you buy into, but it's like we make this through the doing. And I guess that's was my point, is like so much of this journey has been like in the doing, and sort of like almost stabs in the dark and not really knowing how it's going to feel, and then getting there and being like, whoa, this feels so much better than it did before, and I didn't realize how wrong or sort of off or at odds with myself something had felt until suddenly it felt right. And then looking back and being like, oh, I can make sense of this now, and I've got words and language for this, because I've like, but it's, I guess it's like, my point is it's been in the doing that has really, that's sort of been what has led and gone first.
And but there was always an impulse to try that doing,
exactly,
right? And,
exactly.
From that kernel or spark, it's
which
would be that dissonance that you would naturally feel but not have the words for.
Exactly,
right?
Exactly. And actually had the most beautiful talk with my great aunt about 2 months ago. And when I went to see her, she lives up on the North Coast, and I was up there for Tropical Fruits, the festival over New Year's. And I went to see her, and I wasn't sure. I mean, she's on social media, but she's also 90 years old. And I was like, I don't know how across like various parts of this transition she is. And I knew that she knew that I'd changed my name, and I knew that she knew that I was queer, but I didn't really know much else. And so,
or even what framework she was coming from
totally,
as a 90-year-old. Yeah.
And I also hadn't seen her in like 3 years in person. And so I was wearing this like tight singlet and decided to put on sort of a baggy t-shirt before. So I was like, oh, I don't really know what's going on. And then, or how this is going to land. And I walked in, and she just said, oh my goodness, oh my God, look at you. Don't you just look incredible? And she was like, I haven't seen you looking this happy ever. And I was like, literally like, I mean, just
saying
looking the way that I do right now. Like, and she was like, no, there's just this lightness to you that I've never seen you look like this before. And she had, set up all this tea and biscuits, and we sat down, and I was talking to her about the book and then about the PhD. And, she's always giving me notes and like feedback on my ideas, and which was great. And then at one point she was talking about my grandmother, how when my grandmother had come the two of them had come to visit me in hospital when I was 17 or 18, and they had she was saying, your grandmother gave you this bag of lollies, and I could tell you were really sad, and you didn't complain, but I could tell you were heartbroken that she was being dismissive about this, and that she kind of just threw the lollies on the bed. And I actually didn't remember the story she was telling about or talking about But I was kind of sitting there and I was like, okay. And then she was like, do you think they knew? Like, do you think your mum and your grandmother knew then who you were? And I suddenly had this moment where I was like, oh my God, she's talking about me being trans. And so I just kind of said, well, you know, at that time I had been journaling about a desire to like, to remove my, to cut off my chest, or basically to cut off my breasts. And I just looked at her and she said, she asked me about the surgery, and I told her, you know, like that it was difficult and et cetera, but that like undeniably my friends took care of me, and none of them could deny how much happier I already was or seemed. And then she just looked at me and she said, you know, that would have taken an extraordinary amount of courage. I know that you must have had a lot of people in your life saying, are you sure? And is that really something that you want to do? And she was like, you know, because it is quite strange and I've never heard of many people wanting to do that. And then she just said, but you listened to yourself, and for the rest of your life you can rest assured that you can trust yourself. And she was like, you know, not many people can say that about themselves. And I was like, just like immediately burst into tears. It was so powerful and beautiful. Yeah. And I think like that has been the biggest learning for me through this whole process, has been, you know, for anybody out there that is skeptical or doesn't quite understand the trans experience, or, you know, feels like it's all some big mystery, is like, we just feel these things. Like I personally, you know, have felt these impulses and felt these desires and have acted on them, and I felt better, and I've just like trusted myself, and you know, it doesn't have to make sense to you to know that trans people can just trust themselves, and for us to trust that they know what they want for themselves. Yeah, is I think where I'm landing with it.
That's so beautiful. And also, you know, even when you were mentioning, you know, you're going to England and stuff, what was it, for the Edinburgh Festival?
Yeah, I'm going over
I'm
there
thinking
in August.
Now, if you're invited to an American literary festival, is that going to be a problem with visas and all the things going on right now?
I mean, I'm supposed to be going to America in June. So
yeah, well, we've just had some Canadians apprehended by ICE over there and put in cold jail cells. So I don't think I'm going anywhere right now, given both of our social media accounts.
Okay, I'm terrified. Yeah.
Well, best wishes with that.
Thank you.
And, you know, I know you've talked about, and a lot of other people have, you know, talked about the trans experience and, you know, the arguments around, you know, young people not apparently being able to be trusted, like you've just said, with their own decisions. And, you know, I don't want to focus on that for this interview, but just to wrap that part of the conversation up, is there anything you would want to say to people who don't trust that a young person, with the help of their family and doctors, can make these decisions?
I'm not sure. I feel... Yeah, I don't really know what to say to those people that don't trust that. I don't know what the bridge is or the connective tissue. Mm-hmm. I hope that through more stories and more art and I guess through like, you know, whatever that art is, whether it's like paintings or books or TV or, you know, songs, I hope that through the language we find and the stories we tell about ourselves, that will become more and more commonplace to trust people when they say they know who they are.
Couldn't agree more. And I don't know why we can't.
Yeah, surely.
Have some compassion and listen to people, right? Well, I do want to jump into more on the book. Excuse my fringe. I got to take a leaf out of your book. Maybe just cut a bit of it off. But I was at your book launch at the Vanguard last year with Imbi doing the fill-in interviewing, which was fantastic. Good on them. It was a lovely night, and I remember you talking about the origins of A Language of Limbs and, you know, the classic refrain of how almost kissing can often be hotter than the kissing. And I was thinking about it from like a literary technique perspective. And, it kind of, the fact that you have a dual POV between those two characters, it's all immediately builds tension, right? Because that's the whole point of why it's hotter, right? Is the tension there.
Totally.
How do you feel about tension in the writing, and is that tension, because you said that was kind of like the first kernel of the idea, and having them weave in and out of each other's lives, or not weaving, but just almost touching there. Was that, was tension part of that consciously, or you're just like, oh, this feels right, like this is something I want to explore for the next story?
I think both. Yeah, I was conscious of that being like a question that would, hopefully engage people and drive them to continue reading. And also because I guess I was like hoping to incite or like invoke this feeling that had like, I guess, underscored so much of my like early experience of being a queer person, was like one of deep yearning and like not quite understanding what I was like craving or desiring necessarily, but like feeling it anyway. And that kind of like ambiguity of feeling I really wanted to capture in this book by having these two unnamed protagonists who you read, I'm going to just say this without spoiling it, you read the entire book not entirely sure if they are two versions of one story or if they are in fact different people. And so there was something about like suspending people or suspending readers in this sort of like, ambiguity, like I can't quite work out what this is, that I really felt embodied, or like was my attempt at like articulating what I had experienced as a like, what my like overwhelming experience of being queer as a young person had been like. And sort of suspending people in that, like, is this, or I can't quite make sense of this, what exactly is going on?
Sounds like young queerness.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think you're right that like there was, the tension of, are these two stories going to collide? And again, trying to say this without spoiling the ending, because it is revealed at the end whether they're the same person or not. So it was kind of like the tension, that I guess of like, of that pining, of that like deep yearning, the almost kisses, but then and then it also sort of, I guess, sitting in that ambiguity and kind of like not quite knowing entirely the full picture until finally it makes sense.
It's interesting because I read it initially, and I think maybe because so I picked up on it that it was two people, and I don't know if that's because of interviews, but I think a lot of it was because you made some specific literary choices around just paragraph structure, because between each limb 1 and limb 2, as they're titled, you've actually got, for limb 1, I believe it was the full chunk I might be getting 1 and 2 confused, but full big paragraphs. You're not taking line breaks for speech. It's much more flow of consciousness and a little less refined. And then the other limb character is a bit more structured, a bit more literary, let's say. And I think that distinction was, to me, because I've tried to do something in my own POV, dual POV work, where you're actually using paragraph structure to kind of differentiate them a bit, as well as tone of voice. But you obviously had the added challenge of keeping that ambiguity, naming them as if they're two parts of the same thing. So I'm curious as to how you worked on that that process of creating enough identity across them, but still keeping enough ambiguity. Because I also read some of the reviews where the few bad ones were more because they didn't get, like, they thought they were being led down one path and then they didn't quite. So it's
some people are really not happy about being tricked in that way.
Was in terms of like actual literary techniques, was that the sum of it, or was there some more stuff around? How did you arrive at that, I guess?
I think definitely, as you said, I mean, they both start off quite similar in the way that they're written, simply because you've got these two 15-year-old girls in these two stories, and they're both middle class. They're living in sort of suburban Newcastle in 1972. and they're both only children, or like both an only child. And so there's like, you know, life-wise, these two stories are like, or the protagonists of each story are fairly similar. And then sort of, you know, as a result of this night where Lim 1 is caught kissing her neighbour, who's a girl, and is kicked out of home, and Lim 2 wakes up from a sex dream about her best friend that's having a sleepover, and she just turns the light on, looks at her friend asleep on the floor, turns the light off and goes back to sleep, and then they diverge. And so I really wanted Lim 1, this person that is like embodying their queerness in a very visible and like vocal and outwardly public way. Like that side of the story, I let myself just sort of write almost with like no inhibitions, in a very uninhibited way, and also as like I'm purposely forgetting the rules or like gonna just ignore the rules. And like my motto when writing Lim 1 side of the story was to think less and feel more, and sort of just like trust that whatever arose was going to inevitably be like queer in its making, because it was like arising from my like way of being in the world. And then Lim 2, I like really tried hard to stick to sort of traditional scene formulations as they exist in this like Anglo-American tradition of writing, you know, and to sort of abide by a lot of the rules of like, we take a line break every time someone new speaks, and, you know, etc. And so that was like, I guess like emblematic or and it kind of an extended metaphor for how one is sort of like living this queer life that is somewhat without a rule book. You know, there's like very little media for this person to look to in the 70s and 80s, to see themselves represented, to see like, you know, Lim 1 and the character in Lim 1 and her girlfriend are like very much making everything up, like as are most of the characters in Uranian House, which is this fictional queer share house that she lives in. Whereas in Lim 2's story, this person is like playing by the rules, trying very hard to live what she deems a like good and normal life in inverted commas. You know, and so, that was like very much the distinction, was like the ways that they are in the world. I wanted to like mimic in the ways that their stories were told, like actually on, as you said, on the page.
Yeah, and the one's definitely like, if they're not playing by the rules or not living by rules because they don't suit who they are, then why would you write with the same rules? And again, I think that was really well done, because having tried something similar myself, I know it is challenging to do that while still, you know, I like that you were still repeating thoughts across both of them. So there were these links and there were these overlaps, even when there were these kind of lines drawn in the sand.
Totally.
And so I think that really came across really well. Something you just mentioned there, and I had a question ready for it. What is your relationship like with quotation marks?
Oh, I don't know why. I actually don't have an answer for why I didn't use them in this book. I think I just aesthetically liked how they looked without. Yeah, because I've like historically loved quotation marks, and I think a few people were not very happy about the fact that I didn't put quotation marks in this book at all.
And not even
around
on
speech.
The rulesy.
Not in the rulesy one. That is an interesting choice. I don't know why I did that.
I mean, personally, I usually really dislike it because of my reading. You know, quotes just make it easier. And I was surprised that it did work in this. You know, I think the last thing I read that didn't have quotation marks was a Sally Rooney book. Yeah. And I had to DNF it because I was just like, maybe the story didn't pull me in enough to make up for the lack of quotation marks. But this really, and especially for the Lim that is more just like free flowing consciousness, I found it really lent into that really well. The characters' voices were established enough to still differentiate it. But yeah, it's obviously a conscious literary decision.
Yeah, it was. It's funny. This is like, I guess, quite a selfish thing, but I like, kind of loved the challenge of making it legible without quotation marks. Like, I don't know. I guess I say selfish because it wasn't necessarily thinking so much about
the
reader's experience of it, but you know, and whether or not they would like that. But I guess it was like a really fun challenge to be like, can I make this make sense without, you know, especially in one side where, as you said, there's like just really dense paragraphs and there might be 6 different people talking and I was like trying to figure out how to make it clear that it's 6 different people talking when there's no line breaks and no quotation marks. And it was really fun trying to figure out how to do it.
100%. Well, I mean, that's a great example. I think I've talked about this with other people on the show around setting parameters to your creativity.
Yeah.
And then for me, that's a very scary parameter, but I can see how it would embolden characterization in the dialogue, because you need that dialogue to really be attached to that character.
Totally.
To even read it properly, right?
Yeah, totally.
So yeah, good to hear it was fun.
It was a lot of fun.
When I started, I was like, oh no, Dylin, no. But it worked, like, you know, barely a few pages in, I was like, this is gonna be fine.
Yeah,
so,
okay.
So well done on that. I was scared for a little bit there.
Yeah.
And do you think about it as well, where, I don't know if this is a factor for you, but you know, just knowing how mindful you are around decolonization and all of that. I remember when I was young, when texting first started and MSN Messenger was the first, you know, thing for all the teens to chat to. I think I'm only a year older than you, so you're probably amongst that.
Yeah, definitely.
A little bit as well. And being literary nerd back then, even me and a couple of friends were trying to like write in full punctuation in our first days of like MySpace and Facebook, and everyone else was like, why are you doing this?
Mm-hmm.
And we're like, oh, it's the Queen's English, you know, like it's how we've learned. We don't want to like lose this, you know. But now I look back at that and I'm like, well, that's just the nature of language, and who set the rules anyway, you know. Totally. So if you can be understood in whatever way, you know, execute that. Is that at all part of it, or is it just you've got all these tools, whether they're from, you know, Oxford's Dictionary or whatever other texts you've read that do something differently, and you're like, is it more just I've got all these tools at my disposal, or is there anything conscious in that around like subverting language?
I think definitely both. One thing that I was like interested in with this book in particular, I guess because it was part of a PhD, was, you know, like I think I would have loved to have like gone down some rabbit hole for 4 years and just done a like theory PhD, purely for my own like indulgence. But there was something about getting to write a novel as an output of a PhD that felt like, and nothing against PhDs that don't have a creative output, but I personally felt like it was more a better use of my time to like produce a novel that and a dissertation. So the dissertation's, you know, lending itself to some sort of new theory, but or, you know, it's like it is an intervention in a field of a theoretical field, and yet getting to write a novel meant that
you could test it, but
also it's then like widely accessible as a, you know, and I don't think that this is like necessarily the most accessible novel, but it was like the ideas that I've been learning and mulling over, this was a way to like disseminate those ideas in the form of a story that hopefully most people would be able to access, in that does that make sense, where it's like you know, because you could just read this as a love story and, you know, sort of enjoy it as like purely entertainment, or there are those like sort of the subtext and the like the way that I've like sort of, as you said, like broken some of those rules and like but I like wanted, as much as it was like an output of a PhD, for it to still be readily accessible and sort of like you could just read it for the fun of it, if like or you could
do an
study
analysis.
it, you know, do an analysis of it and like get some of the other deeper things that are like embedded in it. But yeah, I didn't like the idea of having just like an impenetrable output that you might need a PhD in experimental writing to understand.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, there's even a moment in the book where Thomas, partner of one of the limbs, I don't know if that's a spoiler, but mentions that he wants his own writing to be accessible, and that's like a reason why, and one of the other reasons why she continues to fall for him, and not to require a uni degree to read or understand or enjoy. And I felt like your writing style here reflected that attitude, but you were just saying that although you aimed for it to be accessible, you said that it may not be the most accessible. Is there a reason why you find that? Is it because of that level of subtext, or?
Oh no, I more mean just like, for instance, someone still has to be literate to be able to like access a book. Yeah, I think that's
the foundational levels of access.
Yeah, sure. I think also the other thing that the other sort of drive or like what propelled that was also the fact that I wrote this so much in collaboration with my friends, like in conversation with friends and having friends read and give notes, and that it really felt like an extension of my like community, and therefore like not only did I feel a responsibility to somewhat get it right, but also like I just really wanted my friends to see themselves reflected in it, and also to write it as a love letter to all of the people who have come before us that like even made my writing and touring this as an openly queer and trans person possible.
Shout out to all who have come before us.
Yeah, truly. And so I think like that was also at play, where I was like, I want this to speak widely, but I guess it's also like that classic thing of the more specific something is, the more universal it becomes, and sort of to try and like anchor it in truths that I know from my friends and community and chosen family, but and then I guess let that speak widely.
Yeah, amazing. You talk about being a slow reader as well, and not really developing a reading habit until or at least like a proper reading habit until say your early 20s in Oxford kind of time, was it? So kind of building on that around access and being literate. Are there advantages and disadvantages that you've found in your process, or even navigating the quote unquote literary world?
I think a few things. One is like, sometimes it's feeling like quite an imposter, having a lot of imposter syndrome. And
even after 4 books and a few other accolades and works.
I guess like the other thing, the main thing about it is like, I remember at art school, my supervisor kept saying, you need to learn the rules in order to break them.
Great.
And I often feel like I don't know that many or something. Or like, I remember when my second book came out, it was a young adult novel, and I was doing this talk, I think at Dimmicks, and it was like a young adult event, like specifically for that genre. And one of the first questions was like, oh, you've subverted this trope and this trope and this trope. Did you do that on purpose? And I like...
Tropes? What?
Absolutely put my foot in it. It was like, oh, I don't really know what the tropes are. And then everyone was like, super fans of young adult, the genre. And we're all like, gasping like in the audience. And I was like, ah. But I feel... I don't know. I guess I oscillate between being like, oh, I like... I have some grip on this, and then being like, what does any of this mean? I don't know anything.
But that's a good balance to keep things accessible and grounded and down to earth. And I feel when I read stuff that is a bit more convoluted or highfalutin or whatever they say, it's or too many adverbs or extra long words that aren't really doing the text service. yeah, I'm like, why? Like, there's a bigger market here that you could be tapping into if you let go of some of your own literary bullshit to just tell the story, right?
Yeah.
And I guess, you know, you're very cognizant, whether it's in your writing or whether it's, you know, how you present online or wherever, being mindful of the full range of people that either don't have access or should have access, or that, you know, if you can do a few different things in your approach, then yeah, you can open those doors up. And yeah, I don't see you slowing down on that side of it at all anytime soon. So yeah, and on that note, when it comes time to editing, is that still in your mind? Is that still something that you talk about with your editor/editors? And just to add to that question, I know I read or listened to your interview with Kill Your Darlings. You mentioned that Lars Horn's Voice of the Fish was inspiring during edits specifically for this book. So yeah, what is that process of editing like? I know I've mentioned a few things you can jump off from there, but because you're obviously working both by yourself in the editing process, but also then if you're hooked into a publishing team, yeah, what are some of the considerations there, and was it a fun process?
Yeah, I guess like it's sort of been different for all of my books. I guess partly because of the like amount of work that they've needed to get them up to scratch, which I guess has to some extent gotten less and less with each book because I've like, I guess, honed my craft.
Yeah.
But actually with The Language of Limbs, there was like, I sort of wrote quite a lot of it quite hastily, like, and that was one thing that I think with my previous book Below Deck, I wrote Below Deck in 7 weeks because it was part of my research project, and so I just like smashed it out, and then the editor I think really wanted me to like draw out some more of those scenes, and I was like didn't, and sort of resisted, and then when the book was out I was like, oh no, I really like should have and I think one really beautiful thing about getting to write this over a longer period of time and having, you know, longer to edit it as well, because it was supported by the PhD, meant that I like the sections that I sort of wrote hastily, I then like sat with for longer and sort of saw the interim moments as part of the process in a way that I'd never valued them to be before. And so like I let things like stew for a lot longer with this book. Like there was for anyone that's read it, and like obviously for you, the parts in Wales in Limb 2's story, I could not for the life of me work out about halfway through the story what was happening in her world, and it just felt so like repetitive to the point where I was getting bored, and I was like, she needs to go somewhere else. Like this is like, we need to like move them somewhere and figure out what's happening. And so for like, it was maybe like 3 months that I was like, maybe this happens and that's why they end up here, or like maybe this happens and that's why they end up here. And I was like, I really want them to be in North Wales, like where Thomas is from, and I was kind of like, what takes them there? And I was like, maybe this happens, and then I figured out the stuff with Thomas's dad, and I just was like actually in the surf, and I like was like, oh my god, that's it. And that then I felt like that whole side of the story then like not only came together but just like came alive, and I was like, oh, I'm actually super invested in her story now too, because I was, you know, looking at it being like, if I don't care about her story, no one else is going to. Like, yeah. And then it was like her and her world became so real and like tangible for me in that moment. And so yeah, there was like the editing process was, I think with this book as well, was like, yeah, again about like parts that I'd written quickly, maybe because I was excited or because I have like a tendency to write quite fast. Was like about slowing down. This book was a real process of slowing down and sort of fleshing things out more, and sitting with ideas for a lot longer.
And that's what you mean by the interim moments.
Yeah.
I have to say, again, without spoiling, when you're talking about X in the other limbs chapter, the prior, and then you come to, you know, you mentioning what is happening with at the very first moment, the first instances of Thomas's dad, and they get the news around that. The way you did that and I feel like several other moments throughout the book where, again, things aren't being said explicitly, but you're using language from one limb's chapter to inform the other. And I just think you did that so well. And I know exactly that feeling when you're in the surf or wherever you are, and whether you're thinking about the book or not, and something just comes to you and like, oh, that joins all of those dots so nicely, and it does come through and adds more tension to that, to that Lim story and the relationship with Thomas, and even one of Thomas's last lines, around like what she withheld from him, and that even that element, like it just. Look, I'm going to say this right now because there's not many. I see the term in reviews thrown around a lot around like, oh, this book broke me, or this, all that kind of stuff. And I'd never really, I'd had emotional reactions to books, both at the end and throughout them. And but I would never say that a book like broke me. And I wouldn't say this broke me, but it got to it throughout. At many, many points throughout the book, I had these moments of like, oh my God. Oh, and then those steadily, as the things get worse for the characters, those moments obviously became more and more weighty, where I wasn't just impressed at the literary approach, like the craft elements of it, but just that it's good when you've got a reader who is also a writer, when they stop looking at it as another writer, and like you're really just getting this wash of feelings, and it's all really coming together in a way that transcends just, I loved what you did there with the technique or craft, and it's actually these really impactful moments. So I have to applaud you there. I actually didn't write that down, but I'm glad I got to say it.
Thank you.
And it just made the whole experience for prepping for this interview, really alive, and so I just thought I'd mention that now.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I really feel like that is like the nicest compliment when like, when you're experiencing the work as well, because I do that obviously as well all the time, especially when I'm like watching something in, a TV show, and the moment that it like ticks over from like me analyzing it to like me being just in it, is such a cool moment when that happens.
Like, that's what everyone else feels. Yes. Well, on the note of television, I wanted to ask how the screenplay side is going. How much, I've spoken to Madeline Gray on one of the previous episodes around that process, and her eventually saying, no, I actually don't want to lead the screenplay. It's a very different environment, not just the format, texturally, but the whole business around it, and much more people. How's that process been like for you, knowing that, for the audience to know that it's not your first time doing screenplays? It was at Cloudy River that you worked at, it was 2018. How is that all feeling now, especially when you're balancing it with the rest of the things you've got to do?
It's been amazing. I feel really lucky to change forms and to be able to like, I think I actually heard Read This, the podcast that we were talking about before with Michael Williams on The Monthly. Michael Ondaatje was on there a few months ago, and he was talking about when he finishes a novel, how he'll go and write a collection of poems, because that novel is everything he knows then about novel writing. And that if he was to go straight into another novel, he would just like emulate whatever he'd been doing in terms of like craft. And I just loved that as an idea, like to jump forms, and because kind of realize like, oh, I will do that all the time. Like I'll get stuck on something in a novel, so then I'll do a painting, or like, and I'll like move around these different languages in order to like find the best way of saying the thing that I'm trying to say, and like, whether it's a visual language or whether it's something on screen and it's, mostly dialogue or whatever it is. And there was something so incredible about, because the show actually got optioned before I finished writing the novel, which was kind of wild. And when that happened, the main producer was like, or the lead producer asked me, do you want us to wait until you finish writing, or until the book's out, to start doing any work on this, because we don't want to interfere with your process. And I was like, no, I want to do this at the same time, because I know that I will find things in the screen adaptation that like I just wouldn't have found in the novel. And that was essentially what happened, where I wrote the first draft of the novel, and then we had a preliminary writer's room from which I wrote like the treatment and the pilot episode. But in that preliminary writer's room, we were only in the studio for 2 days, but there was like so many moments that actually moment that you were talking about before with Thomas finding out the way that his partner has betrayed him, that came from the writer's room. And so the producers were, asking me these really pointed questions, like, why does that person actually say that there? Or like, why are they passive in this moment? What would happen if they said something? And so like, we're trying to do this without spoilers, but if anyone that's read it, when Lim 2 is in Wales and is washing the side of the house with Gwen, like initially she had said nothing in that moment, and then her being active in that scene, which came from the writer's room, like a suggestion in the writer's room, then changed the entire, like the rest of the book basically, because that moment and her action in that scene like had a knock-on effect throughout the rest of the book. And so there was like these amazing sort of tests that happened for me in the writer's room that then like deeply enriched and complicated the book. And then when I did the US edits on the book, the editor that I was working with over there was just like phenomenal, and what we came up with together then made its way back into the pilot episode script. And so it was just like they were feeding into each other in really cool ways. And I also I think like doing Cloudy River, which was this web series I made with my friend Charlie in 2018, and a number of our friends that worked on it, I up until that moment had only ever written books and was like, doing my work in isolation. And that project just taught me how incredible it is to like surrender and to have a whole heap of different people bring different things to your writing, where like the guys that were doing the lighting suddenly changed the whole scene in a way that I never could have anticipated. And it just like added so much richness and complexity to the story, and and where people would find things in the writing that just, I was like, oh my God, I had no idea that was there. And so like, I've always been such I jump at the opportunity to collaborate very much. And that was the best thing about doing the adaptation sort of alongside writing the novel, was I was just like, it's people are finding all this, so much in the work that I just hadn't even anticipated was there. And I actually had like a small event at the Bearded Tit for the launch of the book, where myself and my friend Paul Mack, who's this incredible producer, he and I recorded sections of me reading from A Language of Limbs, and then he built sound around it. And then at the event, I gave these 4 tracks to friends, and they did movement pieces to them on stage. And it was just like the coolest moment to see like art inside art, where it was like, my friends were up on stage and I like didn't know anything of what they were going to do, and so they all did these responses to the text and just like pulled out the most incredible things in the text that I just like didn't even know were there.
Amazing.
And like textures and beats, and was sort of responding in movement to parts of the text that I like hadn't even imagined.
Talking about the collaboration side, Language of Limbs is something that you had a lot of input from your friends and community around their experiences. Were they also beta readers and early readers? Or
what's a beta reader?
So someone, an early reader. Someone who comes, the book's done, maybe pre-professional edit, or maybe it's already in your first edit round. Don't worry, I was like, I should say that for the audience as well. But yeah, were these people reading these first drafts as well?
Yeah. Predominantly, Johnny read of several early drafts, and also my dear friend Kobe Edgar, who's this brilliant writer and curator of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander art, also known as Morgan. And yeah, they like so much of this book is indebted to them. In particular, Marg and Johnny's characters. Morgan workshopped all those scenes and all those characters with me, and was just like, so much of this book is indebted to them.
So when you went to came time for the screenplay writers' room, it was a new level of collaboration and insight into the text, but you already had some rounds of that along the way with friends as well, yeah?
Yeah, or the readers came after.
After the writers' room?
Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah. The writers' room I was with...
I guess because you're still writing at the time.
Yeah. The writers' room I was with my dear friend Cloudy, who's a brilliant filmmaker. And Clouds was in the room with me, and that was a lot of fun.
Fantastic. Well, we're coming up to the end of the chat. I do have a few more questions, but just thought I'd thank you now, Dylin, for your time today, and letting you know that we won't keep you here in your moon boot for much longer.
It's all good. I've really enjoyed it.
Moving forward, again, there's so much we could talk about because you do so many things. You've got the Fruit Zine now live, first edition, you call it in the Zine world, edition or volume or...
it's the first edition of the zine.
Of the zine, I'm even mispronouncing it.
I do all the time, and Peo has been grilling me for saying it's a zine. Now that you're making zines, you have to get it right.
No worries. I was worried about speaking about all of this correctly.
No, you're doing so fine. So fine.
And also, you do have another project, a book that you're working on right now.
Yes.
I read that it spans a whole century, 5 generations of queer characters. What more can you tell us, or can you not tell us?
No, I can tell you. As you said, it goes from the 1920s until now, and sort of follows 5 generations of a family of queer people. And I think because the language of limbs, was set in the 70s and 80s, and that was such a time of like huge political outward protest, and as a result, a lot of, or not as a result, because a lot of that protest was against police brutality and against the homophobia and the really overt violence that the LGBTQIA plus community was experiencing, and even like that, it wasn't necessarily a community in the sense that we say that now, but that, a whole bunch of different groups of people were forced to come together and did band together in order to survive the AIDS crisis and in order to resist a lot of those violent forces. And as a result, the book, has joy in it, but it also has like a lot of that violence and a lot of that heartbreak and devastation. And there was something that I was really excited about with this next book, is it's inspired by my great uncle Doug, who passed away last year, but was...
Shout out Doug.
Shout out Doug. He was the absolute light of my life. I
did read some of the interviews where you're talking about him, and
amazing.
Those first moments of quiet acknowledgement across a table of like who you both, that the wavelength that no one would speak about.
Simpatico.
Yeah. Simpatico. Yeah, that's
Simpatico.
it.
He did. He used to call us simpatico from when I was like 7, and I had no idea what it meant until I was much older. And it describes being on the same wavelength, and I think it's a term from biology. It describes like two things being congenial and them sort of growing together by product of their being together. And he always described us as that, and I thought it was like because I wanted to be an artist like him. It wasn't until I got much older that I was like, oh, he knew that I was queer well before I did. But he was a window dresser at David Jones for 42 or 43 years, and was just the most camp, fabulous person you will ever meet. Like, it was so dramatic and theatrical and incredible. And I really want this next book to be about just people living fully realized lives, like hidden in plain sight, where they're like, they're just like
Literally in the shop front for 40 years.
Yeah, yeah. And just like, you know, very obvious to anyone in the know. But otherwise, they're just two women who are sisters living in an apartment above a lolly shop, you know? It's like...
Claude myself.
Exactly. Where it's just kind of like, oh, of course they were together, but also they were just two sisters, or, you know, like whatever. Yeah, and so this book is very much... it's going to be looking at trans masculinity across the last century, but also, yeah, I really just want like to write about the like quiet, gentle lives of people that were just living, and like, you know, and it was like,
despite the disquiet outside.
Yeah, and just like, yeah, as I said, hidden in plain sight, obvious to anyone in the know, but otherwise like seemingly just passing through.
Amazing. Do we have a timeline on that one? It's not part of the PhD, but
It's
it
not
might
part
be
of the
a
PhD.
publishing.
I am like stinging to
get the PhD
done.
done.
To get the PhD done,
Clear
so that
the
I can start
schedule.
writing it. Exactly.
Yeah, I feel you.
Yeah, because I have. Oh, this will be the first time I'm saying this. I have signed the book to Picador. And
congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, to Pan.
Heard it here first.
Pan Macmillan again. Yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, very excited to start writing that.
Amazing.
ASAP.
So Picador, you said, is under Pan Macmillan?
Yeah, it's like the imprint of Pan
Amazing.
Macmillan.
How's that process been, you know, setting all that up, or is that something that the Beneath and your agent kind of hooks into, and you're just like, let me know how it goes?
Yeah, kind of, I guess both. Well, it's like, predominantly my agent leading the charge on that. And I was really, fortunate that the publishers trusted me with this, because I have never signed a book off an idea before. Whereas, I've always had the manuscript before I've taken it to publishers. But this one, I submitted a chapter and a very detailed synopsis. And
for someone thinking about what goes into my pitch or something, what did go into your synopsis?
It was probably a 3 or 4 page synopsis, very detailed outline of sort of all of the major beats of the story, because I honestly feel like it's all in my head and it's like so clear and fleshed out, and I'm just like waiting for the moment that I can like expel it onto the page.
I'm looking forward to that moment as well. We do have to wrap up now. I have one it's probably a bigger question than it deserves a final minute, but to many of us here who are feeling like a bit dejected or powerless as we're watching everything happen around the world and have done for decades now, you're very engaged, very open on social media. How do you balance all of that with your health, your energy to give to your writing, your family, yourself? Is there anything you can leave us with as to how you're balancing that?
My thought is, so when the 2019 election happened in the UK, and the Labour Party lost in this like massive landslide, I think it was the worst that they'd had in like 70 or plus years, and like to the Conservative Party. And I just remember sort of like staring down the barrel of that and texting my dear friend Yasmin, who also was living in the UK at the time, and I can't remember which one of us said it, but we were like, oh, I guess we make more art. And I think like, you know, like we're seeing just, I don't even know where to start. We know what's going on, like the genocide unfolding in Palestine, like it's just horrendous.
Can't even
the state of the world right now, and the future feels really dark, I think, a lot of the time, and the present moment is like, harrowing to say the least. And I just, the only thing that I keep turning to is making art, and like making art in connection with other people, and you know, what stories are we going to tell about ourselves, and what futures can we imagine through those stories? And I think, you know, I oscillate between being like, this whole thing's really futile, what's the point of making these stories in this context anyway? But then it's like at the same time the only thing that I keep turning to. And so, yeah, that's what my parting words are. We just make more art.
Make more art, and a reminder for anyone who wonders if there is, you know, if it's valuable. It obviously is, and is one of our only tools to really push ourselves in the right direction. Hopefully.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Dylin. As we heard with that buzzer, we are over time. But yeah, thank you so much, and we look forward to all of the work still to come. And if anyone needs, check out Dylin Hardcastle and also Sophie Hardcastle for any of the back catalogue before this one. Thank you so much, Dylin. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been such a pleasure. And a very welcome reprieve to the PhD slog.
Amazing. Thank you for listening to the Hot Nerds podcast. We don't host ads, but if you find any value in what our team does, please feel free to support us via the links in our show notes or buy my book, as it greatly assists with producing this show. Thank you again. See you soon. Stay hot, stay nerdy.